Good morning, everyone who has joined this third session of our course, our Climate and Health Responder course for Latin America. We would like to welcome you and we would like to begin this third session. This is a course organized by 3 partners through Columbia University and also the Global Consortium on Climate and Health Education, the Inter-American Institute for Global Change Research, and the Pan-American Health Organization. As you know, this course is held fully in Spanish, but we have simultaneous interpreting into English. So please have a look at the bottom of the screen where it says interpretation. There you can choose a language of your choice. As you know, this third session in yellow today will be about degraded air quality and wildfires. We have here 2 professionals, Dr. Liana Anderson from the Monitoring and Warning System of Natural Disasters in Brazil, and Dr. Jorge Hernandez Florez. He's an associate professor at the School of Medicine, Universidad de los Andes. Liana will be making a theoretical presentation, and Dr. Jorge Hernandez will be presenting a case study. Regarding the logistics, sorry, there's a mistake there, but well, we need to remember that this will be a 90-minute session, 70 minutes of content, followed by a 20-minute Q&A session. Please, at the bottom where it says question and answer on Zoom, in English or Spanish, please write your questions there. Do not write questions in the chat because we cannot monitor them properly. So please write your questions at the bottom of the screen where it says questions and answers or Q&A. The main language is Spanish, but there is also simultaneous interpretation into English. You can choose your language at the bottom. The sessions are recorded and published within 12 hours on the course website. And the slides will be posted on the website as well. The suggested readings will be available before each session on the website as well. Speakers usually ask questions, ask Zoom poll questions. So please note that when you answer the polls, these are usually multiple choice questions, they are embedded within Zoom. Please answer them on Zoom itself. Do not answer them in the chat because we cannot record your answers. This is a website where you can find the course materials, the presentations, the information about the speakers, etc. Our first speaker today is Dr. Liana Anderson. As we said, she's from the National Center for Monitoring and Early Warning of Natural Disasters in Brazil. She has a PhD in Geography and Environment awarded by the Oxford University. She has a postdoc awarded by the Environmental Change Institute at the University of Oxford. She is now a researcher at the National Center for Monitoring and Early Warning of Natural Disasters, CEMADEM in Brazil. And she's a professor at the postgraduate program on remote sensing at INPE Brazil. Her main research line focuses on managing risks and socioeconomic and environmental impacts of fires in the Amazon. We have a second speaker today, a study case that will be developed by Dr. Jorge Hernandez Florez. He works at the University of Los Andes. He's a medical epidemiologist with a master's degree and doctorate in public health. He was the coordinator of the Air Quality and Health Group of the Ministry of Health of Bogota for 10 years. He's a professor and researcher at Universidad de los Andes. He is currently the director of research of the School of Medicine. He has work experience in Seguro Social, the Ministry of Health of Bogota, and PAHO as a consultant. His area of work, research and knowledge translation, is on the topics of the connection between the environment and health, public health programs, models of care, social and environmental determinants, air governance, and health indicators. He is a member of the International Society of Environmental Epidemiology, also of the Colombian Association of Public Health, Association of Alumni of the School of Medicine of the National University of Colombia, also the Association of Graduates of the University of the Andes, and also of the Colombian Association for the Advancement of Science. Dr. Liana Anderson, you have the floor.
Hola, buenos días a todos. Muchas gracias, Carlos.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Carlos. Now I would like to share my screen with all of you.
¿Qué tal está, Carlos? Por favor.
Muy bien.
Is that okay, Carlos? Can you see the screen? Yes, we can. Please go ahead. Great. Good morning, everyone. Liana, sorry, your connection is not so good right now. Okay, so what I can do is switch off my camera to improve my connection. Is that any better, Carlos?
That's much better.
Yes, that's better. Please let me know if you have, if you cannot hear me well. So what I have prepared today is the following. We'll be talking about how fires are affected by climate change. We will also talk about the health consequences. First, we'll try to understand where, when, and why there are fires and what's the connection with climate change. Also, how climate change projections will also affect fires. I will also talk about catastrophes and the climate emergency we are now going through. I will be addressing some study cases and some figures we have on the Amazon. Sorry, Liana, we can't hear you well.
No sé qué más puedo intentar, Carlos.
Continúa.
Please go on, Liana, slowly, so that we can hear you well. Okay, I'll speak more slowly. We have 4 main air pollution sources. The first group in green takes place locally. This is the urban air pollution in mega cities because of household biomass combustion. These are direct results of human activity. This happens in densely populated areas. There is also, of course, a natural event, desert storms and forest fires, and these are directly connected to climate change. Regarding wildfires and the Sustainable Development Goals, they have over 20 negative consequences, and today we will address just one, the impact on air quality.
para nuestra sociedad y para el medio ambiente.
And we will also talk about how this affects our society and the environment. This is a general overview showing where fires appear on our planet. Have a look at the areas in red where there are more fires. The colors represent square kilometers. Have a look at Latin America. Have a look at Mexico here, Honduras, Venezuela, Colombia, Brazil, Peru, Bolivia, and Paraguay. These are the hotspots. But almost the whole planet, almost the entire planet is affected by this. But we can also have more information about these fires. For instance, we can have information about the areas of larger burned areas. How look at the continuum between red and blue. In our continent, we have a hotspot in Brazil, Peru, Paraguay, and in Venezuela as well. There is another metric, and this is fire duration in days. In America, fires last 5 to 6 days on average, which is quite a lot already. And we can also assess fire size. These are the main regions regarding fire size. These figures are underestimated because it is very difficult, technically speaking, to assess all this through remote sensors, and especially regarding specific types of fire. These fires, of course, create smoke. The main smoke-related contaminants are carbon monoxide, ozone, and particles. Of course, the large particles we can see with our own eyes. The increase in carbon monoxide is more connected to what happens locally, but particle ozone can actually reach larger regions and the continents as well. Have a look at this image where you can see in white, and you can also see this other like darker color. This is wildfire smoke, and because of the atmospheric circulation, this smoke has gone from Brazil to all its neighboring countries. This is then a transboundary issue. In the last few years, we have had unprecedented wildfire seasons in our modern era. 2020 illustrates this trend. In Siberia, 14 million hectares were burned. This is a record area in the Arctic Polar Circle. Also in Australia, it was the largest temperate biome area that was burnt. In also the Brazilian area, almost a third of the Pantanal was burned. And this is shared with Bolivia as well. And we don't yet have the full picture of what has happened to the Pantanal biome. In the United States, over 2.5 million hectares have been burned in the West Coast. This is why this report was launched, Spreading Like Wildfire. This is available here. The material is very useful with a lot of information. We're also organizing this specific issue that will be published in a few months' time. And it addresses the fires in 2020. Therefore, a lot of research is trying to determine what happened in 2020 regarding these large fires. Let us now have a Zoom poll. The first question: does my region have fires? The answers are no. Number 2, once every 10 years. Number 3, once every 5 years. And number 4, every year. Can you please answer this poll question now? I'm not sure if I should answer as well.
Pues Carlos o Hailey, por favor, dime cuando ya tenemos el pool cerrado.
Carlos and Hailey, please let me know when the poll has been closed. There you go. Here we have the results. Well, almost 70% of the participants live in regions that have wildfire issues almost every year. Only 12% of the participants live in a region where they are not exposed to wildfires, and 12% once every 5 years, 7% once every 10 years. So now we know that wildfires affect a large number of those of us here today. The next slide, please. So what about the wildfire sources? For instance, using fire for deforestation purposes. This is deforestation taking place in the Amazon, and this can be found in other areas. Fire use is used for these purposes. Have a look at the carbon on the trees that goes to the atmosphere, and it will contribute to greenhouse gases, therefore climate change.
The use of fire for agricultural purposes, hunting, or the control of vegetation, religious and cultural practices as well, in addition to another 20 types of usage for different purposes. In general, fire is used for agriculture, hunting, or vegetation control, and those other types of uses more prone to lead to wildfires. Drought events. I don't know if you remember El Niño 2015-2016, called El Niño Godzilla, because it was an extremely extreme event and a record event and a record El Niño event, which had a very strong impact on the side of the continent. Our study showed that anthropogenic effects and the effects of the atmosphere contributed fourfold to the risk of that event. I mean, climate change is directly connected to an increase in the frequency and the intensity of these extreme drought events. That we know as El Niño, and we usually speak and link El Niño and extreme droughts. there are also draft events in the Pacific and Atlantic throughout all of the regions in our continent. Therefore, we need to understand these links better. We know that they are directly linked to wildfires. On screen, you can see the accumulated deforestation map, deforestation or degradation forest coverage, and Liliana, if you can hear me, we've lost you. I am very sorry. We are having some technical issues. We hope we can get her back. I think we have lost her. We have lost Liliana. Let's
Looks like she's
wait
just
a few
rejoined.
more minutes.
Alô?
Hello. Haley,
Liana?
Hello?
Haley, how about you? Can you share the slides for Dr. Liliana and she can just speak over them?
Yeah, one second. Let me pull them up.
Lo siento por eso.
Dr. Anderson, we are going to
Sorry,
show your
Lynn.
slides for you and you can just tell us when to go to the next slide and that will hopefully minimize the bandwidth issues.
Yeah, so I think I lost you when I was in the slide 14.
Okay, we'll pull that right back up.
Sorry for that.
No problem.
Lo siento a todos por la problema de la
No hay problema, no hay
internet.
problema.
No problem. You can just let us know when you need to go to the next slide.
Let's see. I have PDF version.
That's fine. Just share whatever you have.
Okay.
Slide 14.
Estávamos aqui, Carlos.
That's where we were, right, Carlos?
Yes. Haley, just download those. That's fine. That's fine. Just put them there.
Pues escucharon cuando hablé un poco de la sequía.
Did you hear me when I spoke about drafts and draft events? I then moved on to deforestation. I don't know. Okay, so I'll pick it up right here on deforestation. Right, Liliana, you can go ahead. Thank you, Haley. So on screen, to the right, we can see the 2020 or 2020, we can see the degradation of forest coverage from 2000 and 2020, and then 2015 to 2020 in the past 5 years. Although we cannot see it very clearly on screen, there are different spots of wildfires across the Amazon, showing that fires and wildfires are very present and even more common nowadays in forests. Next slide, please. Next slide. Great. Something I would like to stress is that we speak about climate change, but really we should speak about a climate emergency. Climate has changed already. In the Amazon, the study shows that the average warming for the Amazon stands at 1.02 to 0.12 Celsius, which is higher than the world average. To the south of the Amazon, we observe 2.5 degrees warmer today than 40 years. To the west, next to Colombia, 1.8 degrees warmer than 40 years ago. The change in temperature is not the only development, but we've seen a change in rainfall patterns as well. In the south, we are going to see a 34% reduction in rainfall compared to 40 years ago. To the west, 19% reduction. In general, August, September, October, which is the period with the most prevalence of wildfires, we have seen a 17% reduction in rainfall. So what we observed is that the weather is hotter, is warmer, and there's been a reduction in rainfall due to deforestation and changes in the use of soil, plus wildfire, which is the perfect recipe really to make this problem even more significant. Next slide, please. If we look at the projections for the different scenarios, the IPCC scenarios, the graph to your left shows the curves with more or less warming with more sustainable scenarios. And in the worst scenarios, global warming reaching 5%. If we look at the maps to your right, the map of South America, we can see the different sites where there's been a higher increase in temperature. The increases are not the same across the continent, but the increase is higher in the tropical regions in our continent. Next slide, please. And here we can see the projections for changes in rainfall patterns. I lost her. Liliana, we cannot hear you.
Sí, buenos días. Disculpen, pero estamos experimentando.
Morning. Well, sorry, but we are trying to fix these problems, and well, we have lost her, and we hope to be able to get her back.
Ahora sí estás de vuelta en sala.
I'm so sorry. In red, we can see reductions in rainfall patterns linked to the scenarios, the different temperature scenarios and the areas where we will see the highest impact. Next slide, please. the differences and with the reduction in rainfall and the increase in temperature will lead to the wildfires or the areas that are burned. The 1.5 scenario is already here. I mean, we have failed in achieving this objective. We now have to try to advance the new objective for the central region of our continent. And if we look at the 4-degree scenarios, we can see that there will be fires pretty much across the entire continent. So the different scenarios show that we are not on the right track. If we continue on this path, the scenarios are not favorable. So let's move on to slide number 20, please. I will skip one. One more, slide number 20. Right.
Entonces, todo este problema, por supuesto, nos lleva a problemas de todo este problema con los incendios nos lleva a
Wildfires and the problem around wildfires leads to different diseases like throat burn, dry cough, tiredness, difficulties breathing. All of these are very difficult for people who already suffer from other conditions like asthma, bronchitis, or respiratory issues. This is also associated to cancer and different mortality rates. We can see on screen different studies to really get to see the extent of this problem. OARE Insoportable is the first report that you can see on screen. It's a 2019 study, and it reports on over 2,000 hospitalizations in 2019 that were caused to wildfire smoke. The report was carried out by healthcare researchers, and they say that the second report states that 68 to 87% of hospitalizations were associated to wildfire smoke between 2010 and 2020. And the monitoring network, the final report, shows figures for the southeast area of the Amazon, where we estimated there were around over 32 days of exposures to particulate materials called PM 2.5. And these levels were over the recommendations of the WHO. Our next slide, please. Next slide, please. We have the next poll. We would like to know if you've ever felt sick due to forest and wildfire smoke. I don't know if you can see, Haley, the results of the poll. Oh, okay.
Ahí está el final.
There you can see the results. I cannot see it myself on my screen. No, I can't. Do you mind reading it out loud, Carlos?
La respuesta sobre no fue el 66%.
No answers accounted for 66%, and only 34% said yes to having felt sick due to wildfire smoke or forest fire smoke. So over 60 people are exposed, over 60% are exposed, but only 34% have felt sick. Next slide, please. I would like to know, those of you who have felt sick, did you seek treatment for this problem?
Tenemos la pregunta en pantalla.
Okay, so the question is on screen.
Y la respuesta
And the
a
answers
esa pregunta
are,
es la siguiente.
Liliana,
No han contestado el 93%
no, accounted for
de
93% of the
y
answers,
7%
and only
han
7%
contestado que sí.
has said yes. Great, thank you, Carlos. So most of those who are more sensitive are children, infants, or people over the age of 60, which I think is not representative of the participants that we have with us today. But I do think that these figures help us understand the next slides better. Haley, I will skip the next poll. I will skip the next poll. So let's go to the data itself. So why are the study is very interesting as it shows that deforestation associated wildfires will cause almost 3,000 premature deaths. So that shows the link between the deforestation in the Amazon and the impact across the continent. In Brazil, exposure to PM 2.5 led to around 5,000 early deaths in the wildfire wave in 2019. Wildfire in the Amazon basin between August and October 2012 led to around 9,800 premature deaths in Brazil. And there is an average of 68 to 87% of hospitalizations in the Brazilian Amazon are linked to smoke.
Liam tiene 5 minutos.
You have 5 minutes left. Great, thank you. Next, please. The main thing is that we do have figures, and this gives us an idea of the size of the problem. Why are the figures so different? Because of the spatial take and the period as well, and of course because of the method, because there are different data, because of the spatial resolution of atmospheric models, inventories, etc. I think the most important takeaway is that we need more studies, even if they are very simple studies, they're useful. I would like now to tell you about two examples. The first one shows that we can relate our data to global databases. Next one, please, Haley.
Podemos hacer una rápida relación aquí solo para pasar que esta base de datos que
this database from the University of Columbia has a lot of data that allows us to ask questions about exposure and also to how this has changed over the years. Therefore, this calculation is much easier to make now. I will not go into detail this time, but we could study the matter further. Next, please. Here we have a more stable statistical basis. We try to calculate the causal effect, which is not the same as a correlation. We estimated that 5% of respiratory disease related hospitalizations have to do with fires in the Amazon. But there is, of course, underreporting in this case as well. Next, please. Of course, our world is now much more complex. We used to have, we had the wildfires in 2020. Have a look at the red line on this chart. But we also had an increase in COVID cases. And of course, the disease targets the respiratory system. Many months later, we had droughts that affected several regions in the Amazon. Next, please. Can you please go to slide 30? Because this shows the impact of droughts. Okay. Have a look at this ad prepared by the government. I really like it because it says that we need everyone's help. And this was February 2021. We had the drought at that time. At the Agenge, we had COVID as well. We had migration-related conflicts. We had the economic crisis, unemployment. And I think that, in a way, is an accurate picture of what happens in our countries. There are several factors that interrelate, and problems are much more complicated than before. Next, please. And now, let us now talk about vulnerability. There are different types of vulnerability. There is, for instance, genetic vulnerability that shows us that indigenous peoples have mortality rates that are 150% higher than the Brazilian mean. Also, infection rates are 84% higher than the mean. Next, please. Second, there is also political and institutional vulnerability. This was very strong in Brazil. The government didn't acknowledge several of the COVID-related problems. We had a huge disaster. It was just like a human catastrophe. We also had a political and institutional crisis. We didn't know what to do with people who were sick. We didn't know how to organize the situation with the deceased. It was a true catastrophe. Therefore, there is also political and institutional vulnerability. Next, please. Next, we have economic vulnerability. These are people that live in slums. We have then COVID on top of the problems that population already has. Next, please. There is also environmental vulnerability. These are the populations that live near rivers, and they have been settled there for a long time. Here, there are several vulnerabilities that intersect. Next, please. And then we can address these issues in detail. And just to provide you with some information, this is a network that monitors air quality. These are citizens, people that have sensors and that collect this data and upload them to the web. Have a look at the United States and Canada. We have lots of data collectors, but we also have several sensors in our countries as well. Thank you. Next, please. I'm about to finish. This is an example of how we can use air quality monitoring data. We use these data to prepare graphs or maps or charts so that the information is available to the population at large, to decision makers as well. Because if we do not monitor these events, there's nothing we can do. So first of all, we need the data. We need to record the data, and then we should analyze them with people from other scientific fields.
No creo que necesita pasar los próximos, es solo una
Okay, I don't
última
think we need the next slides. Just as a final message, I would like to say that we have other prevention measures. I have shown you the monitoring side of things, but there is also education, which is very important, which I can tell you about later on. We also have a monitoring platform that monitors fire risk in protected areas in South America. This is another tool that we can use to implement preventive actions. So this was a general overview. If you have any more questions, we can address them later on. Thank you, Carlos. I'm so very sorry for all my connectivity issues. So sorry. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Liana. Don't worry about it. It happens. Let us now go directly to our second presentation. Dr. Luis Jorge Hernandez. He will be presenting a case study, and then we will have questions. Please remember that all the questions and the material as well is posted on the course website. Dr. Jorge Luis Hernandez, you have the floor. Thank you, Carlos. Can you hear me well? Yes, we can. Thank you, Carlos. Thank you, Pajo. Thank you, Columbia University, for this excellent course. Thank you to Professor Liana Anderson, who came before me and who made very interesting points that I will address as well. First slide, please. Or should I share my screen? If you have good internet, that's fine. You can share your screen. Go ahead. Yes, I'll do that.
Bien, se ve perfecto.
Perfecto. Vamos a ver la...
That's fine. We can see that. Okay, let's see how degraded air quality works when it comes to wildfires. Liana has already told us about this. So how does this affect people's health? Let us now identify a few emission sources in Colombia and Bogota. Also what happens with wildfires, environmental and health-related effects, and some recommendations as well. How climate change affects, of course, the different levels, ozone, carbon monoxide, also how it affects health, because sometimes no health consequences are identified, but if there is a contaminant that affects people's health, although there are no mortality or morbidity data. Air contamination in Colombia, in Bogota, is a huge problem, and wildfires are also a source of emission. We saw this during the pandemic. Although fewer cars were running in the city, contamination levels remained high because of wildfires in the border between Colombia and Venezuela, in borders with Brazil, with Peru, and also around cities. These wildfires, as Professor Liana was saying, in Colombia have other reasons. Most are caused by humans, but there is also the deforestation that occurs, that takes place in illegal areas because of illegal crops, because of drugs, because of other agricultural activities, etc., illicit activities. In 80% of the contaminants come from mobile sources, but air contamination through wildfires is added to this area contamination, which is also very important. And we need to respond to this at the national and international level. Colombia has an information system on wildfires. It has color maps, and it has already been said that increasing temperatures and the reduced levels of cloud and also the importance of winds in our area are conditions. There are some meteorological conditions then that favor this contamination, especially related to fires. We need to remember that air pollution is something that happens worldwide. For instance, we get particles from the Sahara Desert in Colombia as well, and from different factories. Wildfires are a major source of emissions. Please have a look at this map. In Colombia and during the pandemic, have a look at the wildfires along the border between Venezuela and Colombia. Most of them were caused by humans. Have a look at the Orinoquia, Arauca, these regions on the border. These areas are highly vulnerable and they have several illegal activities, illegal crops, also extensive cattle raising, etc. We have already said that wildfires cause pollution because of carbon monoxide, ozone, and particles material. This material and ozone actually travel thousands of miles. So we shouldn't just address cities, and this is what happened with Bogota in Colombia. There is also ecosystem degradation. Colombia has had issues as well as the region. There are wildfires, of course, that cause degradation, but also there is ecosystems are being affected. These systems have different types of forests, humid, semi-humid, Andean, etc. And they also absorb this particle material, and they absorb CO2 as well. Therefore, the degradation of the vegetation cover is also important within the region of Catatumbo, Santander on the Atlantic coast. All of this favors this affects the resilience or response capacity of territory when it comes to adapting to climate change. Because when there are fires, we lack the necessary ecosystems to protect us. And of course, wetlands are being lost. In Bogota, there are 14 wetlands that are affected. 50 years ago, we used to have 60 wetlands, and now we have 14. And these areas actually absorb particle material and CO2. Therefore, this problem causes more damage. So let's have our first poll. Carlos, question number 1. Is this a main source of contamination in our areas? Let's remember that, sorry, this is the question. Is air pollution on account of wildfires a major source of emission in our region? Do you consider that it's a major source of emissions? That would be the question. So that's the first question we have. Yes or no? Okay, there we have the answer. It is a major source of emissions. When we talk about air pollution, we should always talk about fixed sources, chimneys, etc., and also mobile sources, transport, and also other sources such as wildfires, which also have international and regional consequences. Regarding Bogota, the city shouldn't work in isolation. It needs to work together with other departments. We should also remember what happens in Colombia because of the burning of the Colombian and Brazilian Amazon. Have a look at how health is affected because of the different types of material. There is 2.5 fine material. The finer the particle material, the more it can penetrate human airways. And this has health-related consequences. It can cause inflammation and even cancer. The airways, it can affect the airways, also the cardiovascular system, and it can cause cancer because of different components. For instance, in the region, we have had an increase in respiratory related cancer cases. Therefore, we need to monitor this factor. Also, we have talked about carbon monoxide. We should remember also how ozone causes this pollution and also different types of particle material. It's essential to monitor all this. Also, this affects the environment, especially specific forests, sensitive forests and agricultural crops. A large part of the Amazon has been affected. This is a problem because, of course, this area generates CO2. Have a look at the map where you can see what happens in the Andean area, where there is a high circulation of wind between Bogota, Medellin, Cúcuta, Bucaramanga. These are cities that also welcome a large number of migrant populations, and they are also affected by this particle material. As we saw before, burning forests cause an incomplete combustion. And when you add different gases, methane, carbon monoxide, etc., these gases most of them are contaminants. And some conditions favor this contamination as well. Colombia has a monitoring network that covers almost 30% of its surface, and it's not a high coverage monitoring network as in the case of Chile or the United States. It's mid-sized, but wildfires are not seen as a cause of contamination in the programs. Why? Because authorities many times see that this is not part of their competences. However, it's time to consider this. And now this has been included in Bogota gradually, but we're still missing governance and public policies in order to make this visible.
We need to remember that amid the COVID-19 pandemic, air contamination became a very relevant topic.
A la pandemia en el caso de
One
Colombia,
of the strategies to fight the pandemic in Colombia in 2021, we identified that lowering air pollution was a must in the COVID-19 response. However, this strategy is not sometimes considered as part of the COVID-19 response. So it is very important when considering a monitoring framework, for example, in the Atlantic and Pacific coasts, it is important to measure aerosols that are suspended particles. Remember that aerosols are micro droplets, around 5 microns, that remain in the air, and they might contain particulate material and virus as well. So controlling and curbing wildfires should be one of the strategies to respond to respiratory viruses, because they are ecological phenomena and sometimes they are not considered as part of the strategy. So we want to urge authorities to incorporate the measurement of aerosols and controlling emissions as part of the strategies to promote open spaces and to carry out different interventions with national and international authorities to try to mitigate or eliminate forest fires. In Colombia, we have seen great impact of biomass and vegetable carbon. That's why we mentioned this accounts for 20% of the Amazon, 25 to 30% of deforestation in the Colombian Venezuelan border, and the Orinoco, where there is resettlements of population, and the most vulnerable populations are migrants, women, infants, pregnant women, elders, and so on. Transportation and dispersion, we should remember that in air pollution, we're going to see emissions and emissions, and that emissions happen at the site of the fire. Emission happens at the when that particulate material, ozone, is disseminated and mixes with other contaminants or due to the effect of winds. Here we can see aerosols coming from Africa, and we can measure how they reach our continent in the Amazon and in the Colombia, Venezuela, and Colombia and Peru borders. Of course, we will be affected by these winds. So what I mean is that wildfires and forest fires are the result of a social and environmental conflicts that we need to address. Agriculture, illegal crops, and deforestation for carbon of vegetable origin shows conflicts due to settlement or the use of land, because there is an excess of the population that need to settle, and therefore it needs to be addressed through public policy. So we need to tackle the social conflict. So it's not just about environmental issues. That would be an important takeaway. So what are the impacts or the effects of forest fires in our country, and that they require a multi-sectoral approach? So there are recommendations of the environmental area, and this is very common in the Western Hills. So we need to remember that there is vulnerable population that is more vulnerable to air pollution, infants, people who have baseline conditions. And in Bogota, we have an almost 20% of our population with high blood pressure and a 30% prevalence of obesity. So this population is very susceptible to air pollution. What we recommend to these people in particular is that whenever there are high contaminants level, that they use their masks. But this is just mitigation. It is not solving the root cause. The root cause would be addressing the social environmental conflict. In Bogota, in Colombia, we also have a disaster risk reduction system in place and an early warning system. We need early warning systems to tackle and curb forest fires and prevent them from expanding. In forest reserves, in the almost 54 national parks found nationwide, firefighters need to have irrigation systems. I mean, we need to have a preventive system in place for the events of forest fires. Most of them result of the activities of mankind. So we need to have preventive systems in place. In Bogota, we are using the western hills of Bogota to put irrigation systems in place, so we don't need to use helicopters. What we need is to have early warning systems in place to warn about forest fires. what is also important is the agricultural and cattle sector in Latin America. Of course, our economies are basically based on agricultural production. So we need to remind people that they have to comply with different requirements. For example, in the border of Venezuela and Colombia, in the municipality of Guajira, Bolivia, Maucao, in these municipalities, there are many indigenous communities and they might have these traditional activities to repopulate the forest coverage and grass coverage for livestock farming purposes. So we need to work together with the community. We need to organize these activities. We need to install different irrigation systems, monitoring systems, and we need to train our population in environmental quality aspects. So national risk reduction system together with the agricultural and livestock farming sectors should work together and to work on a multi-sectoral approach and response. The second question of my poll is air pollution resulting for forest fires has a natural or anthropogenic origin. Anthropogenic. So what do you think is the origin based on what we have seen? Great, so it's anthropogenic. So of course there might be natural wildfires, but that means the solution has to target the community, the citizens, stakeholders. We need to reach out to our communities. We need to work on the social and environmental conflicts in place. So the origin of forest fires is the same origin of climate change, anthropogenic, and it will cause very high CO2 release together with contaminants, monoxide, ozone, and particulate materials. So what happens in Bogota, in the city, in the capital city of our country? 2020 was an atypical year with regard to the quality of the air. The dynamics in the city changed. We had lockdowns that, although were not very strict, it reduced 70% of vehicle transportation. So vehicle mobility was reduced by 70%. But what happened with air pollution? It was sustained. So it really wasn't caused due to vehicles. But if you look at that graph, and we followed up on the vehicles, and we have 14 stations for air monitoring. I don't know if you're familiar with our city. We have 8 million inhabitants and we have 14 stations. Do you think that that's enough? I would say so. In New York, they also have 14 or 15. So, but look at this graph and how we monitored mobile mean for 24 hours of PM 2.5. This was right in the middle of the pandemic where vehicle transportation was reduced, see very high levels of PM 2.5. And this is the regional influence due to fires, fewer vehicles and transportation. And we can see that forest fires will produce these pollution peaks. And we can see different events resulting from the influence of the Sahara dust, May, June, July 2020. We had never seen or we had never observed such a strong impact of forest fires. So we had to strengthen monitoring of black carbon. And this is important because we were not doing so in the past, but now we are, because black carbon is a great predictor of forest fires at the national level and international level. So the conclusion is that we should not just look at mobile sources, cargo transportation in Bogota, but forest fire seems to be a regional and a local and regional response, and they are really showing social and environmental crises that we need to solve in bordering areas with our communities. And we can look at our limitations. Right here, you can see the names of the stations and the big contamination peaks in Bogota were the result of forest fires. After the pandemic, probably the situation will go back to normal vehicle transportation, and we will see an interaction of different emission sources. But this natural experiment that we were able to carry out during the pandemic showed that the peaks were the result of fires in Bogota. This is the behavior of ozone during an average day in 2020, and they are affected by the solar radiation variation throughout the day, peaking at around 1 in the afternoon. In the morning, the concentrations are lower, closer to 6 a.m., and due to the dioxide concentrations, they will increase. In Bogota, and like Mexico City, we are not going to see such high ozone concentrations, but we observed contamination peaks and ozone peaks reaching 1 in the afternoon, coinciding with the peaks of forest fires observed in the past graph. Remember that ozone is highly irritant for our respiratory system, and we have observed 7% of children with symptoms that are compatible with bronchitis and asthma. So this will severely affect those who have underlying chronic disease, emphysema, asthma, or other chronic respiratory conditions. So forest fires will definitely affect, or definitely affects, the health of our population in Bogota. In the first quarter of 2020, usually during the first trimester, we're going to observe high concentrations of particulate material. So we are going to declare environmental warnings due to atmospheric contamination in February and March. And that showed very high concentrations of PM10. This was the result of forest fires in the outskirts of Bogota. The city of Bogota borders with the Sumapaz grazing areas, and fires in these areas directly affected Bogota. When we are speaking about air contamination, we need to think and consider the sources and the combination, and we need to think of a combination of strategies. So this shows the influence of winds in Bogota, hotspots associated to fires in the area bordering Venezuela and southeast, northwest, and south to the west.
Porque está abarcando. Entonces,
Because this will cover the entire area, the Andes, Bogota, the Atlantic and Pacific coasts, Remember that in the Pacific, we are going to find different indigenous populations that are very vulnerable communities to forest fires. The other message that I want to express is that forest fires will have a more severe effect on the vulnerable population, poor populations, and those communities and indigenous peoples communities. This picture was presented by the Environmental Authority, and it shows how on February 6, 2020, winds transported particular materials from the west to the south of the city. And there was a reduction in the hotspots in the Orinoco, but we showed an improvement of conditions. So the meteorological conditions in Bogota, it's an area expanding for around 25 kilometers, and we have about 8 million inhabitants. We can see how wind transported the particular materials of the forest fires happening to the west of our country in the bordering area. So we worked with the national ministry, but sometimes regional plans and are very hard to implement in Bogota. We are surrounded by 11 municipalities, so it will demand an international response as it is happening in the bordering area. One of the advantages in Bogota is that it's very windy. It's an advantage that other major cities might not have, like Medellin, for example, that it is enclosed by a valley and it's very much affected by air pollution. The IVOCA index, the index for air quality in Bogota, and in February, March, we observed that the southern stations showed regular conditions in Bogota. These were regular conditions, thanks to the measures implemented. And due to forest fires, these yellow spots are showing a higher concentration of PM 2.5 on average, on daily averages. But now, this is not enough. We need to work on shorter cuts, maybe 4 or 6 hours, to value exposure on a daily average. We will breathe 12 times per minute, children even more, maybe 18 per minute. So with every breath, we have contact with the air and therefore with pollution. So we need to work on a no-gas model, to work on hourly averages, 3, 6, 8 hours.
There are also other places such as Kennedy, Bosas, other areas with a lot of population, and this is connected with Bogota as well. There is a municipality of Soacha with 1.5 million inhabitants and with a high number of cars as well. So someone who lives here is exposed because of where they sleep, where they work or study, and because of the areas they go through. 1.5 million people move around, move from these, surrounding cities to the main city. And this happens every day. Therefore, this is a huge number of contaminants. Doctor, you have 5 minutes left. Thank you. Have a look at the monitoring taking place. There is an increase in particulate matter because of the different types of wind and how the particulate matter is goes to the center of the country. We need to work in this regard. These are just a few figures for Bogota. 8% of respiratory disease because of air pollution, 24% of heart ischemic disease, 25% of strokes, lung cancer, 14%. Have a look at these figures. 2,320 deaths every year attributed to air pollution. And we know that wildfires contribute to this contamination. And of course, respiratory diseases need to be monitored, but not just mortality rates. We shouldn't just be counting deceased people. We should also look after 5-year-old children under 5 years old. And we'll go to the Zoom poll question now. Should we be more demanding in the metrics, or so this is the question. Should we improve air pollution metrics, or should we have a better follow-up of the air decontamination plans? So option number 1 is improve atmospheric pollution indicators. Option number 2 is monitor air decontamination plans. Also, low birth weight that is related to air pollution. 14% of children weigh less than 1,500 grams at birth. Of course, there are different types of monitoring depending on where people live. Finally, by way of conclusion and recommendation, I would like to show you this slide. We need to, of course, measure air pollution and do other things as well. We need to remember that wildfires are a major source of contamination emission on account of particulate matter in Colombia and the region. There is an interaction between fixed, mobile, and area sources as air pollution emission sources. We need to measure air quality, and we need to estimate exposure. We need to implement social mobilization actions. This has already been done in Bogota. The air governance activities are being conducted. Of course, PPPs should be encouraged in the region. We need to position the social control in matters that have to do with health. We should also work with air governance. We need to remember that wildfires are a global problem. Also, citizen-based science. We need to have citizens monitor this situation, and we should consider wildfires and also public policy responses. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you. Please stop sharing your screen. Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Liana Anderson and Dr. Luis Jorge Hernandez for your excellent presentations. And thank you all as participants. You've been so very active in the chat and you have asked so many questions. Thank you. And we're very happy to see them all. Unfortunately, because of time constraints, we will not be asking live questions, but we can assure you that in the next 12 hours, within 12 hours, we will be posting all the materials on our website, and most of the questions you have asked will be answered so that you can access all the material. Well, once again, thank you to the speakers, thank you to the participants, and we'll see you again on Thursday on our next session. Thank you very much, and I hope you have a great rest of the day. Thank you very much.